The square between the Sun and Mars within a natal chart represents a permanent, highly combustible state of internal warfare where the core ego and the drive for aggression are locked in a relentless head-on collision. While the Sun seeks to express identity with conscious nobility, find creative visibility, and radiate a steady life force, Mars operates as the primordial warrior, the raw instinct of desire, survival, separation, and physical conquest. When these two high-heat energies lock into a sharp 90°/circ angle of maximum friction, they create a hyper-reactive, impatient, and deeply competitive psychology that is permanently wired for combat. The Sun-Mars square is the archetype of the embattled gladiator, a lifelong internal battle where the individual's pursuit of their goals is constantly hijacked by an explosive, low-grade rage and a compulsive urge to treat every obstacle as an enemy that must be utterly conquered. To comprehend the core difficulty of this alignment is to examine a psychology that operates with its foot permanently slammed on the emotional gas pedal. Mars is raw, untamed energy, and when it bombards the solar ego through a square, it infuses the native's conscious mind with a restless, volatile urgency. The individual lives in a state of chronic frustration, feeling that the world moves too slowly, that others are deliberately blocking their path, and that any delay is a personal insult. This breeds an extreme impatience that constantly spills over into interpersonal conflict. The native does not merely ask for what they want, they demand it with an implicit, intimidating intensity, turning minor everyday interactions into explosive battlegrounds where compromise is viewed as a humiliating surrender. This chronic combative posture creates the primary behavioral hazard of the placement, an unconscious compulsion towards self-sabotage through pure provocation. Because the Sun-Mars square native expects resistance from their environment, they adopt a defensive strategy of launching preemptive strikes. They enter rooms with their emotional fists clenched, projecting an aura of defiance that naturally invites the exact hostility they are expecting. The tragedy of this aspect is that while they possess immense courage and a staggering capacity for hard work, their abrasive delivery, explosive temper, and inability to handle criticism alienate bosses, partners, and allies. They routinely burn bridges, destroy lucrative opportunities, and fracture loving relationships in a single fit of hot-headed arrogance, trapping themselves in a lonely cycle of manufactured crises and bitter, self-inflicted warfare. The roots of this internal volcano are almost invariably traced back to a highly combative, aggressive, or deeply frustrating relationship with the father or early authority figures. The Sun rules the father archetype, and when squared by Mars, the father is typically experienced as a hypercritical competitor, a volatile tyrant, or a figure who was locked in chronic, stressful survival battles of his own. In the eyes of a Sun-Mars child, the father's presence was an arena where validation had to be fought for, and where expressing personal desires was met with immediate, crushing resistance. The child internalizes this threat, concluding that their personal will can only survive through absolute defiance. As adults, they project this adversarial father onto the world, automatically clashing with bosses, law enforcement, and societal rules, driven by an unyielding compulsion to prove that no one can ever push them around again. Physically and energetically, this constant state of mobilization places an immense strain on the native's physical vehicle. The Sun rules the heart, the blood circulation, and the vital spark, while Mars rules the muscles, the inflammatory response, and the adrenaline systems. When Mars attacks the Sun through a square, the body operates under a state of chronic high blood pressure and acute systemic heat. They are highly prone to sudden, violent accidents, cuts, burns, fevers, and catastrophic physical burnouts caused by a literal overload of unexpressed rage and physical overexertion. They do not know how to rest or practice pacing. They run their bodies like high-performance sports cars with no coolant, ignoring pain and exhaustion until their system collapses under the weight of its own internal friction. Yet, the ultimate evolutionary intent of the Sun-Mars square is not to burn the native to ash, but to forge an unstoppable champion, a leader, and a warrior of supreme courage. This aspect does not allow for a passive, comfortable existence. It demands that the individual master the immense fire within them. The true turning point for a Sun-Mars native occurs when they undergo a profound psychological shift from a reactionary street fighter into a disciplined spiritual martial artist. They must realize that their anger is not a weapon to be weaponized against the outside world out of fear, but an immense reservoir of fuel that must be directed toward constructive, monumental achievements. When a Sun-Mars square native finally tames their hyper-reactive ego, developing the restraint to channel their volcanic drive into physical athletics, demanding career empires, or the fierce protection of the vulnerable, the aspect undergoes a magnificent alchemy. The volatile, self-sabotaging instigator transforms into an invincible, magnetic leader of extraordinary resilience. Having conquered their own internal demons and learned the ultimate power of self-control, they emerge entirely unshakable in the face of external adversity, individuals who can walk fearlessly into the absolute jaws of danger, dismantle any obstacle through sheer, focused willpower, and achieve monumental victories because they have already defeated the most dangerous enemy they will ever face, their own untamed fury. To expose the raw, unvarnished engine of the Sun-Mars square is to confront an ego that feels permanently locked in a gladiatorial cage, fighting a war that never actually ends. While the exterior layers of this aspect present as a short fuse, fierce competitiveness, and an abrasive attitude toward authority, a clinical descent into its core reveals an existential dread. The native believes that if they stop fighting, they will be completely erased. The sun is the light of conscious selfhood, but Mars's square operates as an unguided missile of raw adrenaline, repeatedly hijacking the ego's steering wheel. This creates a highly specific, exhausting psychological paradox where the individual feels compelled to treat the entire world as a hostile combatant, misinterpreting peace as an ambush and safety as a sign of weakness. The most profound, unspoken difficulty of this alignment is a phenomenon that can be termed the addiction to the friction. Because the native's nervous system is primed from childhood to operate on high levels of cortisol and adrenaline, tranquility feels to them like an absolute void. When life becomes quiet, harmonious, or cooperative, a deep panic sets in within their subconscious. They feel as though they are losing their competitive edge, leaving them utterly exposed to attack. To relieve this internal numbness, the Sun-Mars square native will instinctively manufacture a battle. They will interpret a partner's sigh as a declaration of war, turn a casual board game into a vicious personal vendetta, or pick an explosive, irrational fight with a coworker over a non-existent slight. They act as their own agent provocateur, blowing up their own peace purely for the raw, electric rush of validation that comes from flexing their survival instincts in a crisis. This hyper-combative armor breeds a dangerous behavioral mechanism known as the projection of the aggressor. Because the native harbors an immense, boiling well of unexpressed hostility and a desire for absolute dominance within their own shadow, they instinctively project this threatening posture onto the outer world. They walk through life utterly convinced that everyone else is just as ruthless, aggressive, and predatory as they are. If an employer offers constructive feedback, the native decodes it as an existential assault on their competence. If a friend sets a healthy boundary, they view it as an offensive strike designed to humiliate them. This tragic misinterpretation drives them to launch devastating, unprovoked preemptive strikes against completely innocent targets, leaving a trail of fractured relationships and bewildered allies who had no idea they were even participating in a war. Furthermore, this square demands an intoxicating, almost masochistic relationship with physical and emotional pain. Sun-Mars square individuals possess an absolute contempt for the soft, the comfortable, and the gentle. They do not want a life that is easily won. They want to drag themselves across broken glass to achieve their goals, believing that success is only valid if it leaves a scar. In romantic partnerships, this manifests as a volatile, exhausting cycle of passion and provocation. They don't know how to receive love without a fight. They will deliberately push their partners to emotional breaking points, testing their loyalty by acting as combatively as possible, under the twisted subconscious assumption that if the partner stays and fights them, it means the love is real. On a genetic and karmic level, this square signifies that the native has been designated as the battlefield commander for their entire family lineage. They are born into a family tree that is choking on generational anger, unexpressed grievances, domestic warfare, or ancestral patterns of violence and disempowerment. The ancestors have suppressed their rage or suffered under the boot of oppression for generations, and the Sun-Mars square child is born holding the sword. They absorb this volatile generational heat directly into their psychic bloodstream, which is why their early life often feels so suffocatingly hostile and unfair. They are forced to experience, process, and completely burn through the accumulated fury of an entire bloodline, an exhausting, isolated task that frequently turns them into the black sheep or the feared catalyst of the family dynamic. The ultimate evolutionary liberation for a Sun-Mars square individual requires the supreme, terrifying courage to drop their fists. The agonizing, repeating cycle of friction only dissolves when the native undergoes a profound psychological surrender, realizing that the enemy they are fighting so viciously in the outside world is actually just the phantom of their own terror, looking back at them from a mirror. They must develop the restraint to sit with their frustration without weaponizing it, recognizing that vulnerability is not a weakness, but the ultimate expression of courage. When a Sun-Mars square native finally tames their inner fire, shifting from a reactionary street fighter into a disciplined master of focused intent, the aspect undergoes a magnificent alchemy. The volatile, self-sabotaging instigator transforms into an invincible, magnetic pillar of authentic leadership. By conquering their own internal chaos and mastering their impulses, they become entirely immune to the provocations of the world. They emerge as true protectors, pioneering innovators, and legendary crisis managers, individuals who can walk fearlessly into the absolute jaws of danger, stand unshakable in the face of total catastrophe, and achieve monumental victories because they have already defeated the most terrifying tyrant in existence, their own untamed fury. Subscribe, like, and share.